started. Yeah, I know.
All right, I'm gonna get started.
I know.
Rock and roll, man.
Nice that some people are out trying to do cookouts, and they might come in here.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, George.
Can you all hear me? Or it's the old, do I need this? No. Good. So, to my left here is William F. DeVault, originally of West Virginia. Yeah.
Originally, I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, but within a couple of weeks we moved to Alaska. And my dad was in the Air Force. And then when he retired, we moved to West Virginia when I was 11. Where?
Yeah.
Morgantown. My mom and dad were both from that area.
Okay.
My dad was actually from a small town midway between Nashville and Flickersville, and my mom was from Osage. You know where Osage was?
I'm not sure.
There was a story during World War II, if you were in a foxhole with a guy and he asked where you were from, and you said Morgantown, he'd say, where's that? If you said Osage, you'd get out of the foxhole. Because Osage was a very, very rough little community. It was about 50% Italian and 50% Black. And in the 40s, that was rough turf.
All right.
Hey, wow.
So William is also, I built him as a California poet because I think he spent like the better part of the last 30 years in California. Is that right?
Actually, I spent about 10 years in the last 30 years. But for some reason or other, I count Venice Beach as home because having lived all over the country, you never really attach to a place. And when I was 40 years old, I moved to Venice Beach. And I've been there about a week. And I went, I'm at home. And it's in Venice Beach, my home ever since then. Yeah. I haven't seen a girl bicycling to the beach in a string bikini. That kind of did it. Like an anchor.
I like having the human bio next to me, by the
Yeah,
way. It's
yeah,
much
yeah.
better than this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read some stuff.
Read some
And
stuff.
you can stop me at any point. William F. DeVault is an American-born poet and author best identified for his prolific writing of romantic verse in various forms. I like that. And to a sequence of totem muses, women he's been involved with whom he identifies by a symbology. Okay. In 1996, he was declared the romantic poet of the internet by Yahoo. His poetry and memes have been cited by such disparate sources as the Suicide Girls and HGTV host Michelle Fashion. How does that happen?
One day, this woman, my mom knew, calls her up and says, Mary, is your son William F. DeVault? And my mom said, yeah, why? She goes, I saw his name on HGTV today. Michelle Bashen used to have a TV show where she'd tell you how to do neat things around the house. And she did this one episode about how to decorate your garbage cans so people wouldn't steal them. And one of the cards that came up was a quote from me. What was the quote? A quote is just a tattoo on the tongue. And it was meant to signify, quotes don't necessarily have to mean Jack. But this woman, was so excited that she knew somebody who was related to somebody who'd been on TV. So I got a hold of Michelle and I said, hey, would you like to write a blurb for my next book? And she did. So.
All right. It gets better from here, by the way.
It gets weird from here. I remember that part.
He's also been cited for his video poem Darfur, Jesus Wept, which received worldwide airplay. Some of his credits include editor and publisher of the poetry and literary journal Anomancies.
Amomancy.
I'm sorry.
For those of you who took Latin, I came up with the word amomancy to imply a writing on the subject of love.
Yeah.
Oh.
He's the author of several poetry volumes, as you might imagine, including Love Gods of a Forgotten Religion, The Complete Panther Cycles.
COMPLEAT, by the way, for you old timers.
Yes. Grace, a Poetry of Affection and Seduction. This is interesting. Blaspheme, the Morgantown Sweet Poems.
Well, those are two different journals. Blaspheme were poems I wrote during a period of time when I was very upset about the death of my father. And they were just not positively religious poems. And Morgantown Sweet Poems, I wrote about Morgantown, West Virginia. And it was fun. And I was getting to go back to old memories from school.
And I'm guessing these are not your only books.
32 at this point, I think.
I'm not gonna go through.
Please.
Cleve Records has produced CDs of his works, sometimes with musical accompaniment, including The Naked Reeds, TBD. Is that right? Or
TBD.
TBD.
I couldn't come up with a title for a CD, so I just put TBD on the label. And somebody said, that's a good name for a CD.
Okay. The Last Romantic Verb.
Yep.
Okay. He provides lyrics and vocals for Dutch hardcore techno recording artist Ophidian. Wow.
He found a recording I made of a couple of my poems. I didn't know about this, and somebody sent me an email saying, is this you? And a link to YouTube. And there was this techno rave going on in Amsterdam, and then the music went low, and you could hear my voice. And I'm like, what the hell? And so when I contacted Ophidian, he said, would you do me a few more recordings? So
somewhere in Europe, people are dancing to your voice.
my Nightfall Angel, which I wrote specifically for Ophidian, went #1 on the techno charts in Europe.
Residual.
Have you ever tried pulling residuals out of a European production? I gave up. I just said, screw
I
it.
was hopeful.
Huh?
I was hopeful for it.
I wouldn't be here if I'd gotten my residuals.
That's true. I think I wouldn't either. So,
Yeah.
Yes, you would, he'd have it.
that's true. He'd have the money. I'll just say he's been the National Beat Poet Laureate. Yeah.
I was named National Beat Poet Laureate for 2017 to 2018. So technically, I'm now the U.S. National Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus.
Okay. And our comrades in the press called Venetian Spider with John Burroughs, who was here last year. Some of you may remember John Burroughs, who was the Beat Poet Laureate last year or the year before.
He was 2022 to 2023.
Okay. We are the only series in Western New York, I think, that's had 2 poets laureate in the last year. I'm gonna say that.
The poetry contest I have established at my old high school, which they insisted upon putting my name in the title. So it's the Morgantown High School William F. DeVault Venetian Spider Press Poetry Contest. This year's judges included John Burroughs, U.S. Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus, myself, U.S. Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus, 2-time Pulitzer nominee Nick Masiosi, the current Ohio Beat Poet Laureate Sandra Feen, and the West Virginia State Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus Daniel McTaggart. So we had a hell of a judging battle.
Good. That is quite a line on your CV if you win it. Yeah.
Our first winner, Patricia Nuoco, who won last year, her book came out about a month ago and is selling well. We're giving a free copy of the book to the college library at Northwestern, which is where she starts this fall. So,
And now I'm gonna read my favorite sentence in the bio.
oh no.
I
I didn't
Just
write
a
this bio, by
combination
the
of
way.
elements here. He is the father of 3 grown children and has worked as a proposal consultant to defense contractors, a drugs and gangs lecturer and counselor in school, and a computer programmer. That's all I'm gonna say. William, take it from here.
Oh no. If I'm moving around a little slowly, I apologize. I had a sciatica problem last year. And I'm still not 100% recovered from it. It ticks me off.
Yeah.
Because nothing offends more than being hobbled. So,
Oh, yeah.
by the way, this is the softbound version of my first book with Venetian Spider Press. The proper version, the hardcover version, is orange, because I put each one in a different color. This is Selected Poems and Passions, 1972 to 2011. It's not all my poems from that era, but it's a lot. I think there's like 240 poems in it, which makes it my third thickest volume. My thickest is 650 some poems, the complete Panther cycles. The first thing I'm going to read for you tonight, unless anybody has any questions or wants to throw darts, is a piece I wrote for my friend Dustin Pickering, who's an editor and poet. He edits a journal called Harlequin, and they were going out of business. And he said, you and I had a discussion a few months back about reading poetry. He said, when you read poetry, you feel that people must achieve a certain level of intensity. And I said, yes. And he quoted a few things from me. I said, okay, you got it. He said, could you put that in writing? Maybe expand it on it a little bit. So I said, sure. So I wrote something up for him, and he put it in the last episode of Harlequin. And the essay is called Flesh in the Abattoir. Talk about having skin in the game. This is flesh in the abattoir. Anyone can read a poem, sitting or standing, to themselves or to one or more other people, in whispers like vespers, or even by way of a microphone. But to read a poem that was written by yourself, publicly, is another level of presentation. To me, poetry is not just pretty words, but a snapshot of the deepest depths of the soul. The making of oneself truly vulnerable, self-immolation. I have compared it in the past to presenting one's heart and soul as earnestly as possible to a prospective lover in the presence of hostile kin and strangers who are armed. To do justice to a poem, having the integrity of the art form, we must be that committed and passionate about it. First, let's be fair. Most people will never find themselves in either situation. Most people do not write poetry. If they read it or the works of others in public, it is for classwork or the like, and they have no flesh in the abattoir, so to speak. They mumble, making no eye contact, not even comprehending what they're saying. The gravity of a dust mote, not that of a magnetar. The stage fright they may feel is shallow, not that of a martyr who is weeping their amomancy with a fierce courage that bids to rip their living heart out and incinerate it. We must consider the intensity of the work, even if it cleverly hides the truth behind the words, behind the intent of the author. Perhaps that is why, however expertly, we can discount well-performed readings of works we ourselves have not authored. For there is a true intimacy in poetry, a truth that transcends craft and style and school. Only the author can truly know the quintessence. Whether the words represent the birth of a universal notion or the wasting death of an heroic virtue, they must carry power on a grand scale. In the beginning was the Word, so says the King James Version of the Holy Bible, equating word and God. It is only when we embrace the power and magnitude of the words that we are worthy of poetry. I am credited with thousands of works, millions of words, and it is only when I leave myself behind that I feel worthy of my creation. And then to have to utter the words to one or to many, that is swallowing again the divine airs that I have already released. It is terrifying. It is euphoric. It is stripping the most intimate elements of myself naked and offering my flesh and blood as a new communion to those who may be indifferent or even hostile to the sacrifice. The dreams of the damned, the tears of a willing sacrifice. Passion, in all the meanings of the word, is what matters. There are those, poets and prophets, who have been flayed alive for merely being earnest, for speaking with an understanding of what they are saying. If you are not willing to express great truths, even in the minute details, even I love you, then you are not reading poetry. Those who wrote and write great poetry leave bloodstains on the altars of their deities. Do not defile their memories with platitudinous shadow puppets against the background radiation of the echoes of the Big Bang. Get your flesh in the abattoir. live up to that. Because to actually live up to that, I've done it maybe twice in my life. One time I left the stage crying. And it was great, and everybody loved it. But it's a little different. I'm now going to read you a poem that I never perform in public. I wrote it many years ago. And it's a strange little poem, not a very good poem. But a few years after I wrote it, I got an email from a man who said, "Did you write this?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My teenage son committed suicide, and I found this poem in his papers." I'm like, oh God, here comes the lawsuit. And that wasn't it. He just said, "My son considered something in this poem speaking to it, and I just want your permission to include it in the memoir I'm writing of my son's life and death." How could I say no? It's a little bit of a dark poem. And reading it, part of me is going like, this probably didn't help him decide to live. But it's called The Darker Angels. A unity of luminescence, the presence of an ethereal incandescent thought caught in the quintessential webs of the predestinate, obstinate denial of what is not less than the truth. Reality, flinty and dark like obsidian geodes, hard cards in the tarot deck of the infinite universe's possibilities. A guard, pardoned for their diligence by their sleeping master's women will, killing time with a clockwork knife. A blade unsheathed in silence. Violence forsworn for the incumbent threat of guilt and penance, from whence flows our memories, cold and callous and calculating. And God sleeps with one eye open tonight. I don't know how it affected the young man. I never heard from him, but I hope it didn't push it. That's always the danger, because you never know what your words will create when you get them out there. I had an old friend come to me one day and say, "You know my husband Dave?" I said, "Yeah, I know your husband Dave. He doesn't know it, but he loves your poetry." I said, "What do you mean he doesn't know it?" She said, "I read him your poetry, not telling him what it was, the night we first got together. And you know my daughter, Crystal? Yeah, you did that." So there's at least one child that I know of alive on this planet because of me. That's obligation. That's power. I did not crave power when I started writing poetry. I started writing poetry, I was discussing with somebody else, that's with you, when I was 8. And people made such a hoopla over my first poem, I quit writing poetry for 5 years. Because when you're 8 years old, you get easily embarrassed by attention. And then I wrote a little bit, and then when I was 17, I wrote a couple love poems. This 14-year-old girl I was crazy mad in love with. And her family and my family were old friends, and I called her up, and I said, "Joanne, can I read you these poems I wrote you?" She goes, "Sure." Now let me do subtext here. We can go back to as far as Doonesbury, we can go back as far as the Bible. I'll go back as far as Doonesbury. There's a bit in Doonesbury where BD, the football jock, is talking about wanting to make a commitment to football, but he's not sure if it's the right thing. And suddenly the heavens open and a dove descends with an olive branch in its mouth. And you hear a chorus screaming hallelujah. And he grins and goes, "I'm going to have a very good year." I read her these poems. And at the time, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. I had a lot of options. And she hung up the phone without a word. And about 2 minutes later, her mother calls. And Margaret, her mother, was an intimidating woman. She was a tough, backwoods, back road, West Virginia bitch. I loved her, but she was tough. And she goes, Billy, yeah, what did you say to Joanne? I read her a couple poems. Why? She's in her room with the door locked, crying her eyes out. And the heavens opened. I knew what I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be writing poetry. And I've never really looked back. I broke up with my first great love at great emotional expense because she wanted me to stop with all this poetry nonsense. And I wasn't going to do that. Let's jump. George Gordon, Lord Byron. You guys may have heard of that.
Right.
I always thought he was something of a jerk, and he was a jerk in real life. In fact, you may not know this, but Lady Caroline Lamb wrote a novel called Glenarvan. Probably never heard of it. It was the first real vampire novel. The lead character was called Lord Ruthven, and he was not a blood-sucking vampire, he was an emotional vampire. He drained emotions out of people. She based him on her ex-boyfriend and lover, George Gordon, Lord Byron. I don't rewrite stuff, and sometimes that means to look, it's a little weird, but I think of poetry like photography. It's not for everybody to do things the way I do, but I write a poem, mostly from the pre-conscious, and that's a snapshot of me or the universe at that instant. And for me to go back and change it is like photoshopping a photo. You're changing the reality. You're playing with the truth. I don't believe in that crap. That's not for me. For others, that's fine. Take 30 years to write a 4-line poem, broody. Go ahead and do it. I get on benders. I wrote the entirety of the Golden Heart Cycles, which is 49 poems in 48 hours. My book, Liaison, which is 15 heroic crowns of sonnets, 225 sonnets, and I defy you to go in and read them all and find any that aren't perfect sonnets. I wrote in 30 days. Yeah, I'm a freak. I'm good at that. Some guys can throw a football. Some guys can lift 300 pounds. Some guys can win the White House. I can write poetry. That's my thing. But anyway, I was reading a thing that George Gordon, Lord Byron, had this weird quirk. He didn't rewrite. He literally compared writing poetry to being like a tiger, pouncing out of the jungle at your prey. And if you miss, stroke them away and give it up on that poem. I'm a big believer in Ted Sturgeon's rule. He was once asked about the quality of science fiction. He said 90% of science fiction is crap, but 90% of everything is everything. So I've got a catalog of a little over 30,000 poems. I don't remember the exact number. It changes from hour to hour, day to day, month to month. But I probably have written well over 250,000 poems. I've just thrown out the bad ones. Back to my case. But anyway, I read that thing about George Gordon, Lord Byron, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not alone in the universe. And I wrote this poem. Welcome to the land of radiant tigers, bright eyes like coherent beaming ruby rods, fiercely piercing the pure jungle of life, pouncing like Lord Byron on a first draft. Poets glide on the slip and slide emotions, wetted and wet with the potions of passion, sweet meats met in a feast of least persistence and insistence on the order of a random universe. Roadwork with the soda work mixology of words that effervesce with a laugh in the daft draft of expressions caught caterwauling to glance off the silver glass mirrors of albedo radiance. Welcome to the land of radiant tigers. Citrus stripes on cocoa black, warm as memory, cold as calculations in an impatient ledger, counting found funds, lost time, and 3 deep breaths. I honestly believe nobody does anything for one reason. You may have a primary reason, but you also have 300 secondary reasons. Why did you get a nice tea today? I can think of half a dozen reasons why I wanted a nice tea. I go back and I read poems later and I go, holy crap. I make specific references to at least 3 and maybe more, because I haven't yet figured it all out yet, of my totem muses in that poem. Specific phrases that are key to those individuals or my memories of them. So when people ask me, why did you choose that word or that phrase? I'm like, it just happened. Several years ago, I was living in Mississippi. I've lived everywhere. Mississippi was not a good place for me. I'd go for a job and they'd go, do you know what the word lagniappe means? And I'd be like, it means a little. Well, yeah, sort of like that, but it means a little bit nothing. But the 2 questions I got asked most on job interviews was, where are you from? My general response was Earth. And where are your people from? Earth. Never quite got that. When I got divorced from my second wife, it was a divorce in Mississippi, and we wrote up the papers ourselves. I'm arrogant enough to believe I don't need a lawyer for a lot of crap. We turned it in and it was rejected. You know why? We didn't state we were white in the opening paragraph. At the time, in Mississippi law, you had to state the ages of the 2 individuals and whether or not they were white. So our paperwork was rejected. We got a lawyer, and the lawyer basically inserted, they are free, 21 and white. Boom, divorce grant. States have different things. There's a weird little concept in law called actionable words. I don't know if some states have gotten rid of it. These are things that are so offensive in the individual states that even if it's said as a joke, it is actionable. You can sue for slander. In West Virginia, it's saying that a man is a coward for refusing to accept a duel, even though dueling is illegal. In many of the southern states, it's saying that an individual sleeps with slaves or barnyard animals. I didn't make the laws, they're on the books. It's like that peekaboo law that jumped up in Arizona from 1864 concerning abortion. Now they stay on the books forever. But anyway, I was down in Mississippi, I was hanging out with some poets, and one of them said, what do you think of Donald Hall? I said, I don't like him. I know there's some people so right now. That's cool. I said I did read one poem of his that I liked called To a Waterfowl, which I thought was pretty cool. They said, why don't you write a poem about Donald Hall? I subverted the purpose. I wrote this poem using the general structure of To a Waterfowl to talk about writing poetry. And in my books, it says, I read poetry dedicated to Donald Hall. There is no fear on the edge. Joy. Joy is what I find in the instance between moments when my feet are touching nothing but sky. And the rocks recede to return sooner or later, driven by great gravity and the intemperate nature of natural law. But in the bizarre moment, leaping from precipice to precipice, I am reborn, triggered and transfigured. Worn away are the chains of, the pains of, the stains of mortal mediocrity. And I am one with the clouds. And I rain poetry, for that is my nature. As you turn your face skyward, catch a few drops on a tongue parched by the dry air of memory and the sun of shallow sentiments, sold in the hallmark rack in the name of mass seduction, and I rain poetry. To irrigate the fields of forever and make them ready for the seeds planted without your realizing it. When you waved to me as I ran the cliffs, high above the plains of stale acceptance, and danced, and danced, and danced like a hurricane at the thought of you, naked in the rain. And I rained poetry, bringing the thunder at the appropriate moment, When all other senses were spent and only sound could penetrate the wet shell of overloaded synapses, what passes for the echo of fire that surged and purged the very ions of our irony? And irate poetry, calling the winds to lift me, to gift me with the words that you would carry eroded into your sandstone soul, never more than monolith, but an aggregate of your essence with flecks of my pitch blend, bound to you by eloquence that quenched an ancient thirst to you in a garden you will never see, except in the mirages of the maelstrom. And I read poetry. And it was nothing compared to a single honest kiss. But it was, in the absence of passion, a worthy golem in the armies of solitude, up on the cliffs where I still dance with the winds and call the thunder, even when no one watches or cares or dares to dance along. But that is my nature. I think I've taken up enough of your time.
Would you be willing to sit up there and talk a little bit about some of the things we
Hold it.
mentioned earlier today that nobody else knows about?
There is one more poem I want to do.
Oh, good. Okay.
It just occurred to me, and I took the liberty of marking in here where certain poems were. Where is that one? Page 192. One of my favorite historical figures is Sir Francis Walsingham. Anybody here know who he was? He was the master of assassins for Queen Elizabeth. His job was to make sure Elizabeth lived and to do whatever was necessary to protect her. But for the longest time, he resided in Padua, Italy, hiding out there, waiting for her to achieve the throne so he could come back. I've had more than one long distance relationship with a woman from a different country. And I sometimes have felt like Walsingham, having made a promise that I must keep at a distance, which is annoying as hell, but nonetheless, this is called Walsingham in Padua. I have given my word. Strange word. It carries itself with more boring eyes in the back of the skull when you are full of your own definitions of honor. It is said there is no use in worrying about the water when you are dying of thirst and you find it bubbling up pure, cold, and with a slight air of the center of the earth. I have lingered enough, bare feet calloused by pain, denying myself and my desires. The fires attest of the metal that is at its best zested by a kiss extended into madness. I have broken with the past, giving up more than you know, accepting a new commission, a new purpose, head bowed in humility that belies my arrogance and my skills. You asked for me by name. I am called back into service of a distant league to make me in foreign lands for a time, before acknowledging me at court, welcoming me home. But I am grateful and ready. I have counted the petals of the lotus. I have tested the metal of my blade and my pen, obeying the rituals that may seem arcane to you, but that define me. I will serve you until I fall. I will not swerve or lose nerve, even if left, like Walsingham and Padua, to await the time when all is to be revealed. I will stay true to my vows. Had to do that.
Not grill you. We were going to talk about passion.
Passion.
Yes. So when I asked William what he wanted to talk about, he said passion and patience.
That's why I had to do Walsingham and Padua.
Yeah.
Because it's about patience.
Right. First of all, what's your definition of passion?
Passion. Ooh. It depends on what sort of passion we're talking about. Passion is an amplified emotional state generally obsessive. And that serves its own purpose. As such, you can equate it with lust, which can be argued to be a negative emotion. I think isn't it one of the 7 deadly sins? Something like that. But at the same time, anything you do without passion, is it really worth doing? Or is it just rote? I'm going to dig a hole. And I'll keep digging this hole. And I'm going to keep digging this hole. There's no passion.
Well, so we all do things to make a living, right? Right. So you're a consultant for a defense contractor. Just, so do you do that with passion?
Let me clarify. Defense contractors. I currently have 5 clients, 3 in active status. I found out a long time ago that my brain works the way my brain works. And I could either sculpt it with some other sort of creature. Sort of like carving a bar of soap to look like a gun and then paint a shoe polish and go, stick them up. Or I could let it work its own way. And whereas I lack the ability to focus for long periods of time, which is why I write poetry instead of novels. But also, I'm reasonably good with the word. I'm reasonably eloquent. I excel in extemporaneous speech. When I was in college, I took a class in public speaking under who was that? Dr. Rockwell's. And all you had to do for this class was show up 3 times. Well, actually 4 times, because you had to get the syllabus. But 3 times, and you had to get 3 speeches. The first speech was advocating something. The second time was to argue against something somebody else advocated for. And the third time was to be extemporaneous on a topic thrown out by the teacher as you got up to the podium. The class would score you, and then the teacher would score you. And they would be balanced out. For my first speech, in which I advocated for, I don't remember what I advocated for. I got the equivalent of an A-. My second speech, for which I argued against the death penalty, which had been somebody else's advocacy, I got an A. And for my final one, which I don't remember what it was just topics on the I also got an A. And I got to the class. Because I can argue either side of any issue that somebody wants to throw at me. And generally do it pretty well. Well, writing proposals for federal contractors, I can argue either side of the issue, as long as I do not have flesh in the abattoir over it. But at the same time, I never want to lie, which is sometimes funny. People say, all right, explain to them why this jar of peanut butter is the ultimate weapon. I can't do that. I'm going to pass on this opportunity. And I've done that many times. So I'm generally recognized as somebody who has some ethics, which is really tough in government contracting. Because everybody wants you to tell people why they have to buy your jar of peanut butter. But I remember an old cartoon in the Saturday Evening Post, which was a man sitting on a couch with a housewife, and he's got something in his hands. God knows what it is. And he's saying, well, no, now that you ask, it's not as good as my competitors. No salesman's going to do that. And I'm not a salesman. It's merely my job to point out the elements. I'll look at a movie or a TV series. No show of hands, please. But I'm thinking of a recent, well, it's been on for a couple of years, but I just recently became aware of it. It's a period romantic show. And one of the characters behind the scenes has been writing descriptions of things that go on at court. And everyone's going, who's doing this? Who's doing this? And it's this one young woman who's a little on the chubby side and is generally neglected. And now people have figured, now we have been let in on who it is. Well, it's third season now. And she's getting her romance. And there are people going, who would be interested in her? I don't know, let's take a look at her values, let's take a look at her actions. She's intelligent, articulate, plugged in, very sweet. And as long as somebody doesn't have an issue with a woman who's carrying a few extra pounds, and a lot of people aren't, I don't see a problem with that. I'll be honest, I tend towards the anorexic side. That's just my nature. I have had a few people I've been involved with who violate that. But the simple fact of the matter is we can find virtue in anything. You know, as long as you're not so functionally fixed that you can't. Those of you who took psychology, remember the concept of functional fixedness. And it's a sign of intelligence. If a chimpanzee is given a screwdriver, one way to tell its intelligence is whether or not it can figure out other things it can do with the screwdriver, having seen it being used to drive screws. You can use the screwdriver as a knife. You can use it as a wedge. You can even turn it around and use it as a lightweight hammer. You can use it to prop something open. You can use it to wedge something shut. And every use you can come up with for that is a greater measure of intelligence as to what you can do with it. I sit in meetings all the time with half a dozen highly paid consultants going, well, yeah, but it's a jar of peanut butter. Listen, what else can we do? And eventually, you come up with other things to be done. George Washington Carver, anybody hear of him? Man invented hundreds of things to do with the peanut. Hundreds. Most people just go, oh, it's peanut. I can eat it. This guy said,
looks like great on mouse in that
I know that very well because we had a mouse and I bought a really neat plastic mouse trap that all I had to do was put a little peanut butter on it and I set it down under my desk. We had 3 cats. None of them even cared that we had mice. I was sitting there for a few minutes. I hear snap, and I check the trap and there's a dead mouse in it. And I'm like, okay, I bought 3 more of those traps and I haven't set them out anywhere because I haven't seen any mice. But the next time I see a mouse, I'm setting one out with peanut butter on it. Much better than cheese. Cheese dries out and loses its flavor and its aroma. Peanut butter doesn't as quickly. And everybody tells me to use it. But the bottom line is figuring out other ways to use what's put in front of you.
I mean, you started this
And then I went off on a completely
last
different-
discourse, yeah, but you started it with kind of an implication about sincerity. Like when you write, it's really important to sincerely feel, believe what you're writing, but yet, I think this is a question for everyone, like, there's another kind of writing where you're aware of your sincerity.
Right.
And so you're at a, you know, it's a self-consciousness, it's a deliberate self-consciousness in your writing, where you're aware of what you're doing and you're kind of, there's an ironic distance maybe from that, and that's a different kind of writing. Do you engage in that? Do you, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
I don't like doing it. I understand it's for other people and that's fine. I remember when I was 10 years old, a neighbor knew I wrote poetry. Came over and said, I have to take 3 original poems about Halloween to a Halloween party to be let in. Do you write them for me? I have no idea what the gratitude was for Halloween. And Halloween is like me. Most people consider Halloween about a second tier holiday. You know, it's Christmas, maybe New Year's and Easter, and then from that. My Christmas and Halloween is Valentine's Day. Because I like romantic poetry, because I am a Frenchman. But bottom line, everybody comes at it from a different angle. Everybody has a different way to play it. One of my best friends on the planet is Daniel McTaggart, West Virginian beat poet laureate emeritus. One of the reasons we're such good friends, we met during our 2005 tour for Love Got Movie. And there was an open mic at the end of my presentation. He came up and he read a couple of poems about diners. I would never write a poem about a diner. I have no interest in it. but they were well written. And they showed that he really likes diners. And we've been very good friends since then. I designed covers of 2 of his books and he's published one of his books. I think she started class. There's no competition there. There's no reason why we can't be best friends.
Diners. This relates to your to my next question and last question, I promise. When I think about diners, there's a poet named Rebecca Shmuyeda, who I think lives in Pennsylvania, who's sort of one of the poets laureate of diners. She's got whole collections about working in diners. Rebecca Shmuyeda.
China's a great.
So, yeah, they
So
are.
large.
I'm a New Yorker, so I love diners, especially Greek diners.
I understand.
So who are the poets that you love reading that you want other people to read?
Anybody who's been published in Venetian Spider Press, buy all their books. Well, and some of them are people that I published because I love their work. Nick Masiosi, he was formerly Ohio Teacher of the Year. He's been twice nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, once by Venetian Spider Press for his book City of Hammers, which is about a young man forced to practice the piano. His work has a very Americana earthiness, grittiness. And I like it when I read something and go, whoa, I like resonance. Because to me, all art, when it comes down to it, is resonance. If you paint a painting and it is a photographic perfect painting of a sailing ship, but nobody reacts to it by going, wow, that's not art. It's craft, but it's not art. Art affects people emotionally, for good or for bad. I have had people I've never met before this life read some of my poems and send me naked pictures of themselves. Why? My work affected them that way. Okay, great, groovy. I'm not going to run off and move to Ireland for them, but I mean that's the bottom line. People need to be affected, need to be impacted. Dan McTaggart writes some really good stuff about stuff I would never write about. Hang on just 1 second. My heart rate just rose. That's interesting. Ooh, I was just before my heart rate. It was about 120. If I drop over dead, and
You did mention getting naked pictures.
some of them pretty nice. My constant collaborator, who I always talk about, Maria Andreevich, has done a couple of covers for me and is working with Hammer Mansis magazine and other things. Is a Ukrainian-born, currently a refugee in photographer who specializes in artistic nude photography. Fortunately, she's beautiful enough and fit enough that a lot of the photographs are of herself, because that way she doesn't have to go looking for a model. A lot of others, when I speak of that. She didn't come looking for me. I didn't come looking for her. So we kind of crossed paths. But she's a great photographer. Other writers, John Burroughs, solid poet, solid poet. We're in similar wavelength, but a little different. Sandra Feen, who is the current Ohio Beat Poet Laureate. Perfect. By the way, I've got to clear something up, and I know I'm going to get shot for this, but what did that member used to say? Anybody here offended by crude language? Fuck them if they can't take a joke. I am the U.S. National Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus. I'm not a beat poet. I've written a few hundred poems that could be considered in the beat vein. The beat poets, almost to the last man, are dead. They were a school based on a certain period in American literature. The guys like Kerouac and Ginsberg. Ginsberg's estate gave me written permission to do a recording of his poem Howl on my podcast, which I did. Is it a great recording? No, because I kind of hesitated saying some of the words that are in that one. But I don't know any other newbie poet who would ask for permission to do his poem. They kind of feel like, we'll do whatever we want. I'm of the old school. If a person wrote it, they own it, ask permission. You know, to me, it's nothing short of literary rape if you take somebody else's creation and use it as your own. Even if you're saying, you know, so-and-so wrote this, I'm using it. Ask them if they want you to present it. That's just human decency. I'm not a beat poet. I'm a romantic poet. My works have been compared to, yes, Byron, Wordsworth, Shelley, thank God not Swinburne. Listen for me laughs in there. And a few of the others, because I believe in form and structure. Like I mentioned, liaison is sonnets. Most people don't even know what a heroic crown of sonnets is. It's a series of 15 sonnets where the last line of the first sonnet is the first line of the next sonnet. And after you finish the first 14 sonnets, the first line of all 14 become a 15th sonnet. So you better have the whole picture in mind when you're doing it. And that's a reason why I've known a lot of people who started making heroic crowns of sonnet. They get about 2 sonnets in and go, I can't do this. You have to have the craft. All the great masters, Picasso, Michelangelo, Rodin, if you don't know who Rodin is, go find out. Were masters of their craft before they were masters of their art, because you have to have the craft to do the art justice. You have to know what you're doing. The people who try to paint abstract art without ever having painted a bowl of fruit, they're tilting the windows. They're just not going to get it done. They just can't. Did I digress too much? Because I do digress.
No, but you made me think about pattern and why people write poetry particularly. There's a predilection in the human mind for pattern.
Oh yeah,
Pattern recognition.
absolutely.
And so why should you think, if you think about it objectively, why would I sit for a month probably, which it would take most people, to do what you just described? Except for the fact that I'm obsessed with like fitting the little pieces into, you know.
I'm going to steal something from somebody, but he's long dead, and I'm not insulting him. 'Twas brilliant, and the slightly clothes did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy where the borough grows, and the mown rats outgrave. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird and shun, the frumious bandersnatch. I can go on and do the rest of the poem. I'm not going to right now. The whole point is, if those were not in a pattern that made it easy to remember, I would not be able to recite. Poetry was originally conceived of out of the nature of human beings to remember patterns. And therefore it can be quoted, it can be repeated, it can be built upon. 7 years ago, our fathers, whatever. Not quite great poetry. There's a scene in one of my favorite TV shows of all time, The West Wing, where the president is called upon to give a speech because there was a fire caused by a bomb at a college swim meet. And he's talking about the emergency workers who ran into the flames to try and rescue people. And he ends his speech with, there are too many angels in heaven tonight. We can remember one line or two pretty easily. But rare is the thing where you can recite the whole thing. I'm amazed by people who can recite 100-line poems on their own. I had people come up to me and recite my poems word for word, and I'm like, get away from me. people come up to me all the time and say, do you remember the poem you wrote about blah, 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 blah? Can you recite it for me? Go find Tom Clancy. I know he's dead now, but it's the original version I did. Go find Tom Clancy and ask him to recite to you the 3rd paragraph from the 27th page of his 15th book. And when he can do that, I will recite you whatever poem you ask me to. I can't store 30-some thousand poems in my head. Very well, the 250,000 I've also written. Unfortunately, some of them are still stuck in there, but you know, that's what happens. The patterns help. They make it easier to remember. They make it easier to learn. Resonance is based upon learning. Resonance is based upon feeling. We have to have a reason to remember something. Not just that it was eloquent, not just that it was well written. Anyway, You're getting me up on my soapbox, man, don't do that.
Yeah, no, we talked about spoken word earlier, which is something that we haven't really done here. I haven't posted a spoken word event or a slam, although I've posted many in my life. It's a different art form for that reason.
Yes, it is.
There is no paper.
Mhm.
If you're in a slam, you're not allowed to have paper. You have to memorize everything, and then again, and also have to get inside the persona of the poem so that you can deliver it as though you are an actor performing that part.
I'm sure,
Which is something I do with my students to make them understand classic poems.
I'm sure you've heard of poetry out loud.
Yeah.
I've been a judge in two different states on poetry out loud. And people go, well, it's a great poetry thing. No, it isn't. It's a great recitation thing. None of these poems are original. They're given a book that contains hundreds of poems that have been pre-approved, and you're supposed to pick one, memorize it, and recite it. You may not even understand the words that you're reciting. They measure you based on the perception of how well you understood it and how well you recited. I saw a young woman at the Virginia Regionals a few years ago, started a poem, got about 6 lines into it, and got so into it emotionally, she choked up and couldn't finish the poem. She was out. She probably resonated with that poem better than any other person I've ever seen with a poem. But she was out because they weren't measuring her flesh in the outer. They were measuring how well she could recite something that somebody else wrote. So, yeah. Which is one of the reasons I haven't been back to do any more poetry out loud.
I'm not gonna grill you anymore, but maybe do other people have questions?
Questions,
Responses?
with Joe? Oh, this is right.
So, thank you for tolerating my pink music stand.
It's a lovely music stand. Pink is a great color. I think I've written some poems about pink before, but not suitable for mixed audiences. So,
Well, can I ask you one more thing? Do you have any of your books here? In case anyone's interested.
unfortunately,
Oh,
I did not.
ah,
I brought one copy that I marked up of the softbound, but I will tell you this. After I get back to Sterling, I plan to send you guys a box containing some of my books and some of the other books from the Venetian Spider Press. And they will be available here, and if anybody wants to buy one, fantastic. Piece of advice to any of you authors who are planning to webpage or planning to a book. Never donate a signed copy of the book. A friend of mine pointed this out to me. She said, if you donate a signed copy to like a library, it gets stolen within about 2 days.
So it gets read,
Huh?
it'll get read,
Yeah, by one person.
otherwise it'll be sitting there with it.
It's like years ago, the great artist H.R.D. who designed the alien and the subsequent ones, put out a book called the Necronomicon of his art. Amazing stuff. It was all wrapped in plastic, all the books. He signed a few hundred of them. You could go into a bookstore and find ones that plastic had been ripped open because people were looking for the signed copies. Because they signed one. When I sign my books, if I ever sign a book for you, and I do it the way I always put the date I signed. Why? Tomorrow morning, leaving, I might fall down the stairs and die. And you might have the last book that I signed. It's now
I'm
with
gonna push you
the.
down the stairs.
That's why I'm not giving you a book right now.
this is a comment on our staircase.
Don't go near it.
Yeah, don't go near it.
No, I hurt my back last year. Stairs are a little more scary than they used to be. I'll survive it. But no, you guys have been a great audience. You know, I would entertain any questions.
Yeah, there's one poem we read. I think it's even the title that I couldn't catch. It was one about Donald Hall, or based on.
I read poetry.
I what?
Rain, R-A-I-N-D, poetry. It was written at a time when I was known as the cliff runner because I took a lot of chances with my work. And people said, you don't run along the cliffs, you leap between them. And so I went, okay, let's take that metaphor, mix it in. You'll also find, if you've read enough of my work, you'll start noticing key phrases that indicate certain totem muses. There's about 7 different women tied up in that poem. I'm horrible in that regard. I'm horrible. No, years ago, I found out that if I assigned a woman one woman asked for it. They don't worry so much about them being revealed. And I figured the day after I died, they'll be coming out of the woodwork. I was the panther, I was the leopard, I was the tin soldier, I was demon tourmaline, all this. And I'm like, why couldn't you women just come forward in life?
That's the heart of it. Yes, okay.
Oh, no, it was just, actually, it was one of my clients.
Oh,
Reaching out to me going, we just got an amendment, and I'll take a look at it later this evening. Thank you all so very much. Thank you for inviting me here. This has been terrific. Right, I've looked up some of the trusts.
Well, we'll take a couple minute break and then get to our open mic. Unlike William, maybe like most of you, I've never been sent naked pictures from him. So I'm gonna ask a secret to you.
I will.
I'm used to the southern.
Well, actually, my first wife was from Oak Hill, which is down in the south, near Beckley.
From Virginia.
Beckley.
Anything to say?
From Virginia, down there.
That story.